middle mic.
A little fun exchange going on in the House of Commons today.
Perfect,
Well,
Scotty.
the MPs are ready to rumble as well, and let's bring them in for today's View from the Hill. Joining me in the foyer, Conservative MP Stella Ambler, NDP MP Charlie Angus, Liberal MP Yvonne Jones. Welcome to you all. All right, Yvonne, let's go to you. This is your Liberal leader here. I often wonder whether the delay was almost worse than a joke. Why did he take so long to just say, look, I'm sorry, let's move along?
Well, first of all, I think you have to recognize that he unequivocally apologized today.
After 24 hours.
He met with the Ukrainian ambassador. He met with the Canadian Society for the Ukraine. And I mean, they're quite happy. Actually, they're quite happy with the policy that we passed at our Liberal convention this week, which really called upon the government to put strong measures in place to ensure that we had the protection of civil rights in the Ukraine. And you know,
you can dodge and weave. I got to get you though. Seriously though, I mean, it almost looks like he was hesitant, that he wasn't sure of what he should do in this situation to delay and rag the puck.
I don't think he was hesitant because he was unsure. I think any hesitancy that might have been seen was as a result of the fact that he did not see that this was going to have such an impact. It was not meant in bad taste. And it was certainly not meant in any way to slight the Ukraine or the situation that is unfolding in their country. And I think that Mr. Trudeau's record will show that he has done whatever possible to ensure that there is protection of civil rights in the Ukraine, and that countries like Russia don't get to rule the game when it comes to what happens there.
Stella and Charlie are trying to hold back, so we'll let them vent now. Stella, I mean, is this over now?
Oh, I don't know, but it just shows such a monumental lack of judgment. This wasn't just a tasteless joke. This is part of a troubling trend. This is a pattern for, you know, he likes the dictatorship of China because it's more efficient. He calls for the root causes of the Boston Marathon bombing on the day of the bombing without talking about the victims first. I mean, this is someone who thinks who wants to be the Prime Minister. I mean, you know, I think Canadians look at what the concrete action that we've actually taken. Prime Minister Harper announced today that our Foreign Affairs Minister John Baird is going again to Ukraine tomorrow to meet with the transitional government. We were the first country to recognize independence in Ukraine. We've sent aid to protesters. Our ambassador for religious freedom visited also in December, and contrast that with Justin Trudeau, who taped that interview where he made the tasteless joke and remark on Thursday. And when you then consider the time period between Thursday when it was taped and this afternoon when he apologized, it is appalling lack of judgment.
Charlie, does this actually define his character, or do you think it's overblown?
Well, I'm not going to light my hair on fire about this. I think there's a couple of issues that we have to look at. Number one, Canada has huge connections to Ukraine. Probably the largest Ukrainian population outside of Ukraine is in Canada.
1 million people have roots there.
You know, we've been watching this horror unfold and people putting their lives on the line, people dying. So making jokes about it, I'm sorry, it just doesn't pass any kind of, like, you can't teach political smarts. You can teach policy, but you can't teach political smarts. But the difference here is that yesterday the response, and Mr. Trudeau has shown lapses of judgment, and it's a fair question. If you don't have the judgment to be Prime Minister, you need to be called on that. But it was Team Justin around him that this was another case of people being mean to Justin. We had his senior advisor calling out the Ukrainian ambassador for being negative about Mr. Trudeau. That is not the appropriate response. To double down when your leader makes a major mistake, the senior people around him should have said, my God, Justin, did you actually say that? We need to fix this. Yeah. And I think Canadians are reasonable, but in a situation where human rights have been so abused, that level of judgment is the big question.
I did want to point out, though, Stella, and ask you about this if I could first. I mean, the ambassador was here yesterday, and he says, look, I haven't had a single communication with the government side of this thing. They've never called when they were going to impose sanctions. The book of condolences has been sitting over there for a couple of days. Not one MP from the Conservatives had come over there. In fact, Justin Trudeau was the first one to sign. Why are you shutting out the ambassador? He's trying to represent as best he can a very changing situation.
Yeah, I don't know the details of the relationship with the diplomat, with the ambassador. I do know, though, and I have friends, parliamentarians who were in Ukraine for the last election. We sent 500 election observers. I don't know what the plan is for the next one, but I know that things are finally getting better there, and that our government wants to take part. And I know that the will is there. I mean, just the fact that the Minister of Foreign Affairs is going tomorrow to meet with the transitional government, I think says a lot about the fact that we're willing to take concrete action right away.
They're taking anyone else from the Conservatives or NDP along with them on this Ukraine trip?
I'm not sure.
I don't think you've heard of anyone being invited? All right.
I'm sure it was organized quickly. Sorry.
Erwin Cotler, maybe, you know.
Well, listen, Erwin Cutler tried to go to a conservative organized event in Israel and got shut out, got the door shut out, although it was paid for by Canadian taxpayers.
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't.
And
I'm not sure about that, but
not paid for by.
You know, Mr. Adler was hosting some event over there, and he certainly didn't want Mr. Cutler there, who was traveling in Israel on his own dime.
Crashing the party.
I don't mind asking about that because I found that an interesting story. Laura Stone of Global broke it today about how Mr. Cotler was basically stood outside the door and told to go away. And he's not making a big deal out of it, but some of the Jewish people that were attending were upset because Erwin Cotler is not just an MP, he's a very renowned human rights advocate and very, strongly fixated to the Jewish people. All right, Charlie, was this a sign that partisan has gone right over top and jumped the shark in this place and that really nothing can be done of any cordiality between parties?
No, Don, I mean, partisanship's always been there. Government members always freeze out opposition. It's part of the deal. I think the problem is that when you look at the diplomatic picture in Canada, again, Mr. Cotler, him and I have disagreed on many things, but he's a respected parliamentarian. He's very respected for his work on Israel and also work in the Middle East. If you look at Mr. Harper's trip, it was a stage-managed show where, the question that Canadians ask is, where is the balance? For example, he referred that Israel was the only light in a region of darkness. Well, what does that say about Jordan? Jordan plays a huge role. Mr. Adler and is really embarrassed, I think, all Canadians with his whining to get in the so-called money shot. Diplomacy in a region that explosive has to be done with a higher level of maturity than just simply getting the photo ops for the members to take back to their ridings. Mm-hmm. This is where I think the exclusion of Mr. Cotler is it leaves a bad taste. In a situation like this, just do the right thing and make sure that you're not going in and trampling all over a whole manner of very sensitive issues. Do it right.
Lest we forget, in the Mandela funeral, the Prime Minister invited former Prime Ministers and other party members. He showed a very open dialogue, and good thing. You want us to talk about the Adler shutout, or do you want to move on?
If I might just quickly make the point that it was not funded by taxpayers. Maybe I don't know if that was in the story or not. I just wanted to make that clear. It was a private event, and so while Mr. Cotler is absolutely he's a widely well-respected member of Parliament and a strong voice in the Jewish community, he wasn't invited to the party. He was essentially crashing, and I'll say Mark Adler was
Erwin Cotler, party crasher. Never thought of him
also
in
a strong voice in the Jewish community. He happens to be my seatmate in the House of Commons. I know him well. He's principled, dedicated, loyal, hardworking member of Parliament.
I don't run out of time, but going up.
Be a liberal too. Speaking of
one issue back before we go. Brad Butt is a Conservative MP. He's got himself in a bit of apology mode too. He apparently lied to the House of Commons about having seen voter identification cards being taken out of recycling bins and used by people to commit electoral fraud. He says, nope, I actually made that whole thing up. I'm curious if I could get your thoughts in particular. What should be done with an MP that on a very important matter like this now admits he's lied to the House? Is that enough? Sit down and grovel?
Don, this is extraordinary because we're talking about the right of Canadians to vote. I know many senior citizens who show up with that voter ID card. That is their ID. That's what they bring with them. If they don't have the driver's license, if they don't have their address on identification, that's their ID. Mr. Butt got up and he lied about witnessing crimes that never occurred, while this government is attacking voter registration, saying that there's widespread voter fraud. So, I think the Speaker has to come back and say this was a contempt of Parliament. I think there has to be a higher level. If you can just go in and make things up and lie about crimes that never occurred, then what is the point of having a House of Commons?
Interesting. What do you think should be done?
Well, first
quickly.
of all,
I'm out of time,
I
apparently.
don't agree with the bill that they're proposing. I don't agree that they should be taking out the vouching system, doing away with the voter cards. I think is wrong. Any MP who lies, in
What do you do, throw 'em out?
to members, well, they should be thrown out. They should at least have to do some kind of penance. I mean, we cannot have that kind of stuff going on in a
40 Hail
parliamentary
Marys.
system. No, but what
right.
I'm saying is that
I gotta round it up.
is that these stories are going to now formulate policy that will influence every Canadian.
Good point.
It will affect how democracy runs in this country, and the only thing this bill is going to do is actually prevent people from voting.
Wind it up, Stella.
And that's what Conservatives want
There
to
are
see.
serious problems with vouching. An Elections Canada report told us that 1 out of 4 votes that were vouched for in the last election
Is
were
lying in the
suspect.
House, serious?
Were suspect, and that
think
has to
lying's
be
serious.
stopped.
Okay.
Lions.
Good enough. Thank you all. Appreciate you coming in.
Yeah.
We'll talk to you next
Thank
week.
you.
Thank you, Don.
After the break, Canada's ambassador to the U.S. says there's even bigger pipeline showdown with the United States.